Today, I want to talk about the 15-minute rule of bass fishing. To me, this is one of the best things that you can do to stop wasting time out there on the water and find bass quickly. So stay tuned, it's gonna be a good one. If you're looking for a holiday gift, look no further than the bourbon bass ornament. This ornament is made from oak wood from a bourbon barrel. It looks great on a tree. It makes a perfect stocking stuffer or a white elephant gift. So if you guys would like to pick up the bourbon bass ornament or some fishing apparel, check out Fin Fishing down below in the description. Now, I am definitely not the originator of the 15-minute rule. I believe the first professional angler that I heard talking about this was Brian Thrift. And this kind of goes back to answering the age-old question of how long do I stay in an area? How long do I give an area before I move? And something that he said, Brian Thrift, that really kind of correlated with me at the time is that when he finds one of those really good areas that has a lot of fish in it, just a lot of life, he is typically going to catch a bass within about 15 or 20 minutes. And so he doesn't typically give an area more than about 15 or 20 minutes before moving to another area in the lake to try and locate bass. So after I had heard Brian Thrift talked about this, I really kind of thought about my own fishing and kind of about some of the best areas that I have found on lakes across the nation. And I thought about some lakes up in New York. I thought about some Florida lakes. I thought about some lakes all over the place. And what I found out is that he's right. Just a few years ago, I was fishing a lake down in Florida and I was fishing endless amounts of reeds. I knew that the bass were potentially spawning, but I hadn't found that right little area. And sure, I had caught a couple of fish here and there, but I finally moved into this area. There was a little bit of a subtle point in the bank. And as soon as I moved up there, I caught a fish, literally not within 15 minutes, within about 5 minutes. And then I proceeded to catch a lot of fish over the next half hour. And that is the type of area that I'm talking about. These really good areas that have multiple fish. The type of areas that if you are a tournament angler, you love to find because you can catch a quick limit very fast. But even if you are not a tournament angler, you still like to go out there and absolutely catch the fire at a bass. Now, I think that it is really important to understand that I'm not saying you couldn't go into an area and fish in there for 45 minutes and then catch a bass. What I'm saying is that when you locate these really good areas, these areas that have multiple amounts of bass, not just one or two fish, you typically catch them really quick. So the next question kind of becomes, how do you more or less implement that 15-minute rule when you go out there and go fishing? Now, over the last probably 5 or 6 years, this is all that I have done when I've gone out there fishing. And especially when I fish new lakes, like when I do a lake break series video, which you guys really love, this is something that I constantly do. I try to fish a general area for about 15 to 20 minutes. If I don't get bit, I don't necessarily make a humongous move. Sometimes I will just make really small moves. For example, a lot of lakes across the nation are reservoirs that have major creek arms on them. And these creek arms typically are home to bass. But sometimes what you have to figure out is where the bass are located in that particular creek arm. You know, whether they are pushing up in the spawn or moving out in the post spawn. This is something that I am constantly doing. So when I am fishing a new body of water or even a body of water that I actually have a lot of experience on, I try to break that creek arm into about 3 to 5 different 15-minute sections that can help me to figure out the bass. So typically what I will do is I will fish the very mouth of a creek arm first. I will actually fish the points that are kind of leading in to that creek. And sometimes this means that I will give 15 minutes to the actual bank. And sometimes I will actually fish the points that are coming off of that creek arm. The next thing that I typically do personally is I'm actually going to run to the very back of that creek arm, as far back into it as I can get, because to me, there's two real major high percentage areas when you look at kind of a creek arm on a map. And typically one is the mouth, like we just talked about. The other one is the very far back end. Usually that is where I'm going to find fish. I'm not saying that you won't find and catch fish in between. We're going to talk about that in just a minute, but those fish typically are a little bit harder to find. So usually I fish the mouth for 15, 20 minutes, maybe both sides. Then I will run to the very far back of a creek arm and fish around. A lot of times you're going to be fishing, this just depends, but you're going to be fishing, you know, a lot of maybe wood or lay downs that are in that area. Maybe if that lake has a lot of grass, you're going to be flipping mats that are in the far back of that area. It just depends on what type of cover is in the lake that you are fishing. But I'm gonna fish that for, again, 15 or 20 minutes. And then what I will do is typically pick out two what I think are high percentage areas that are kind of in between. So if I don't catch fish on the mouth, if I don't catch fish in the back, then I'm gonna look at that in-between zone. And like I said, I'm gonna look at high percentage areas. So sometimes while I am driving to the back from the mouth, I'm going to look visibly with my eyes at what I think is a high percentage zone in the middle of that creek arm. And so sometimes this can be vastly different, again, depending on the water that you are fishing. Sometimes I will fish, maybe it's just a really good boat dock. There's a really good dock somewhere that's halfway in between. I'm gonna remember that, so when I come back, I can fish around that boat dock. Sometimes it's a creek channel swing bank. Those are some of my favorite areas to hit, because bass will use a creek channel swing bank literally year round. So if I see a good little creek channel swing, I'm gonna remember that, so after I fish the back, I can come back to it. Maybe it's just a really good laydown. Sometimes you see a single big laydown where it's like, man, I gotta fish that right there. As a matter of fact, I did this in one of the lake break videos. As I was running back to fish the very back of the pocket, I saw one single laydown in this whole place. And actually, I'm gonna go ahead and run the clip real quick right now of what I did, because I pulled right up to that laydown, and this is what happened. I was actually gonna go all the way to the back of the pocket, but there isn't a lot of laydowns or anything like that in this particular body of water, but there's a good laydown right there. I'm gonna flip it, and maybe it'll give us a clue, you know? There's a school of, look what looks like crappie in there. See them right on the end, the tip right there? See all the dots? It's literally like one lay down in this whole freaking place right now. Can't tell me there's not a bass on it. Let's see what these guys are out here. See those? About 30 foot away. I got it right there. Oh, and it is a bass. There's our first clue, guys. That's a good one. Oh my gosh. Come here. Oh, all right. First clue. Now, a lot of times when I break down a creek arm in this way, I will find fish somewhere. I will typically catch one fish. And if I catch the fish in the way far back of the creek, then guess what? I'm gonna go to the very next creek arm, and I'm gonna start in the very far back of the creek, because I'm trying to establish a pattern. And so this is how a lot of times you can do that. And you can also just find really good areas. Maybe you don't find a pattern, but you find a spot. You find a really good area that has a lot of life. And this is exactly how I go about finding them. Now, some of you are sitting here thinking, Tyler, that sounds great, but I actually don't fish lakes that have creek arms. Maybe you live more up in the northern part of the country, or even down south, like in Florida, where you're fishing more natural lakes. These are lakes that don't have a tremendous amount of contours to them. Now, these can be a little bit different, but what I like to do a lot of times in these style of lakes, I'm still gonna apply that 15-minute rule, but I'm gonna look at a general zone in this case. So a lot of times up north, I like to fish really subtle points. And I'm gonna pick about 2 or 3 areas on a very subtle point where I can fish for 15 minutes. So a lot of times if I see a subtle point on the map, typically the first place that I'm going to hit is the very end of that point. Why? Because that's a high percentage area. And I'm gonna fish around that little point and see if I can't locate a bass or two on that point. The next kind of area that I'm gonna hit is kind of the inside corners of that point. These are kind of like little funnel areas. These are areas that can actually be really good in the fall time of the year, but fish can relate to them at any time of the year. I'm gonna fish those little areas for about 15 minutes again. And then another area that sometimes I hit, and it's one that a lot of guys don't necessarily hit all the time, is right up on top of the point. Now, when I break down kind of a subtle point like this, they're typically really large, vast points. That's kind of what you see a lot of times on these bigger natural lakes. Now, sometimes you'll fish smaller lakes, whether that's smaller reservoirs that have creek arms or smaller natural lakes that have real small, subtle points. And you can actually you can fish a whole creek arm in 15 minutes, or you can fish that whole point in 15 or 20 minutes if you're going pretty fast with the trolling motor. Another way that I use the 15-minute rule is actually by fishing specific pieces of cover or structure for only a 15-minute time frame. So maybe you get to a new body of water and it has docks, and it has riprap banks, and it has wood laydowns. So instead of selecting general areas to fish for 15 minutes, I might just fish a certain type of cover for 15 minutes or 20 minutes. Maybe I will hit a row of docks. You can typically hit probably 3 or 4 docks in a row in 15 or 20 minutes. Or maybe I'll fish a riprap bank, maybe a really good section of that riprap bank where you know that that fish is supposed to be. Maybe it's the very end of a riprap, maybe there's a point in the riprap. I will fish that for 15 minutes. Maybe then I'll switch over and I'll fish wooden laydowns. Maybe there's a stretch that has some wood laydowns or a couple of big laydowns. I'll fish that for 15 minutes. Maybe I fish the docks and I don't get bit. Maybe I fish laydowns and I don't get bit, but then I fish some riprap and I get bit. So then you kind of have to then figure out where on the riprap you're getting bit. So maybe you find that it's always on the point, or maybe it's where there's a transition from really big rock to little rock. So it's always about breaking things down to try to find the highest percentage area that you can. This is how you truly unlock a lake, because once you start to see exactly what the fish are relating to, then you can just run around and look for it visibly with your eyes, or maybe if you're fishing offshore with your electronics, and start catching a lot of fish in a short amount of time. This is what we call getting dialed in. Now, the last thing that I want to talk to you about when it comes to the 15-minute rule is lure selection, because I think that the most important thing that you can do is kind of more or less junk fish why you are doing the 15-minute rule. And what I mean by junk fish is you're gonna have probably 6, 7, 8, 10 rods on the front deck of your boat, but these rods, these lures that you're using are all ones that you are extremely confident in. These are ones that you have caught a lot of fish on. They are your confidence baits. So no matter what cover or structure you're fishing, you are very confident in the lures that you are fishing with. Now, I actually talked about this junk fishing with an Elite Series Pro, Kyle Welcher. He's an Angler of the Year, and I'm gonna leave a link for that video right here. So if you guys wanna understand a little bit more about junk fishing, click on that. Thanks for watching. Don't forget about those bourbon bass ornaments you can pick up right here, and I'll see you in the next one.